Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, Professor David. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Management Development Program on Sustainable Supply Chain Management. So, before Professor David could start his presentations, it's my pleasure to introduce him to the audience. So, with over 30 years of experience at a senior level executive, director level, driving value and the change through procurement, organizational transformation, and change management. His background spans a variety of roles with a significant global experience and responsibilities in both private and public sectors, namely uh, construction, pharmaceuticals, banking, fleet management, FMCG, manufacturing, consulting, retail, aerospace and defense, venture capital, healthcare, and local government. I think almost all the sectors are covered. So, formerly Group CPO for Rolls-Royce, he was the principal architect behind the behavioral science led approach to drive adoption of a new digital platform. Appointed as a visiting scholar at the University of Eastern Anglia, Northwick Business School, and Professor of Research Impact (SCM) at a Leeds University Business School in 2022. Professor David is currently working as a professor at University of Leeds, UK. His areas of expertise are supply chain management, procurement, ESG and sustainability, social value, and the applied behavioral sciences. Professor Losby is editor-in-chief of several prestigious peer-reviewed journals, namely Journal of Responsible Production and Consumption, Journal of Public Procurement, to name a few, and published various academic and white papers. Notably, he is a top 50 recognized thought leader in procurement and change management as per Thinkers 360, and top 100 global thought leader in supply chain, diversity and inclusion, design thinking, COVID-19, and related issues. So, with this brief note, let us welcome Professor David to the meeting. And thank you very much, sir, despite your busy schedule. I know very much how occupied you are. So, despite your busy schedule, you could make it to the event. And little bit of about the participants, sir, I would like to brief you. We have about 560 registrations received, but due to some issues with respect to the online meeting, so we thought we'll be broadcasting through the YouTube. So they will be joining, and hopefully people will be joining soon. And it will be recorded in the YouTube, and they can also watch it when they're free. So this is what is a little brief about the participants, and I have already sent you that they are mostly from you can say research scholars and faculty, and about 20% are from the industry. A few are from abroad, namely USA, UK, and UAE, and so on, Sri Lanka. So with this few words about the participants, and I hope you can continue presentation, sir. I just leave the session to you. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you for that very comprehensive introduction, Pramod. And of course, welcome to all the guests that have joined today from wherever they are in the world, different time zones, and let's do our best to try and get into this quite interesting subject, recognizing, of course, that we will have time for questions and answers at the end, and I'm sure that will be moderated by the panel. So I will go through the presentation. So feel free to push out your questions in the meantime. And of course, I'll do my level best to answer them. Of course, all the complicated questions I will save for Pramod at the end of the seminar. So without further ado, I'm going to launch into the presentation. And of course, when I was invited to speak, which I was glad to accept, clearly this is an area where there are both prospects and challenges. And I think in that, I think hopefully you can recognize that this is a very complex area and is of growing importance, particularly to CEOs and executive boards around the world. And of course, we are probably at the best point in terms of, I'll call it recognition, both as a profession and academic scholars in this area. So in terms of defining what we mean by sustainable supply chain management, the way in which I define it is it's the goal of sustainable supply chain management to minimize the negative environmental and social impacts associated with the production, transportation, and distribution of goods and services, but also maximizing the economic efficiency and value creation to promote long-term sustainability for society as a whole. Now, that's quite a mouthful, but obviously, as I said earlier, it's quite a complex subject, and it's very, very comprehensive in terms of it touches many parts of many organizations and many value chains in many organizations. What I do recognize also is that the principles of supply chain management don't really change. It's the dynamic factors, as I call it. And what we're seeing is that sort of the skills and competencies, process efficiencies, knowledge management, relationship management, total cost of ownership, and data, of course, all those key attributes that surround supply chain management strategies effectively don't change. What does change is the environment that sits around it. And of course, therefore, we need to recognize that we have to develop the skills in terms of agility, adaptability, and flexibility to recognize the environments in which we are now operating. And of course, that complexity increases and indeed changes on a very regular basis. So what we think about, and what I think about in terms of the essence of sustainable supply chain management, for me, there are probably those key attributes that I put on the slide there, which is environmental, sustainable, resiliency, circularity, economic, responsible and social equity, and agility and flexibility. But these are all underpinned by what we call the leadership, the governance, and the ethics. And as you'll see from much of the research, those attributes that we consider in terms of sustainable supply chain management must prevail. So therefore, we have to make sure that we have a balanced way of evaluating all those different attributes and recognizing that those attributes, in terms of their importance, in terms of their weighting, in terms of their significance, may well change from product or service or good as the requirement sits. And this is probably where I start to think about the ways in which, again, how we recognize this as an example at Rolls-Royce. If you think about an aerospace and defense supply chain that goes across 50 countries and involves an engine that probably has anything from 20 to 40,000 parts, you start to begin to understand the complexities of that. And then you think about then, oh, by the way, we're just going to introduce this thing called COVID-19, and we're going to shut down many sort of offices, factories, and production. So what we have to then think about is all the things that we need to then invoke in terms of, so the environmental considerations and the resiliency in terms of then starts to increase as a significant factor, because what we have to think about is the way that we can safely and ethically operate production lines, shipping lines, all those kind of things. And it meant for us that we had to then think about, the attributes around, for instance, making sure that we could provide personal protective equipment for people on the production line. And as an example, to underscore, if you like, the significance of a supply chain, in that particular instance, Rolls-Royce consumed its annual consumption of personal protective equipment in 3 weeks. So if you start to then visualize that and say, hang on a minute, we've only got enough PPE for 3 weeks, that changes the demand signal significantly in terms of how we then need to operate, thinking about just sterilizing operational and production facilities, setting up new supply chains to bring in all the things in terms of the alcohol-based cleaning substances, personal protective masks, putting vending machines, believe it or not, into production facilities so that each and every single employee could draw down on a daily basis their personal protective equipment. You can imagine that sort of the economics and the responsibility that then go with resetting a sustainable supply chain fundamentally change in terms of thinking about how we design, for instance, a full face visor for an individual. We broke that down into 3 constituent parts. We utilized 3D printing to create, if you like, I'll call it the frame of the headsets. So some very simple innovations meant that we could take lots of complexity and produce those at source, at point of consumption in the workplace. So we start to think about the way in which we then effectively reduce the need, in a sense, to ship, freight, and transport goods and services across the world. And so starting to think about these things in different ways was very much about the sustainability of those operations, those pieces of activity. And so therefore, it takes the leadership and the ethics associated with that to think about doing things in a different way, to respect, if you like, in a sense, the external factors that clearly any one organization has no control over. And this is effectively where, for me, in a sense, some of the skill sets are so important in terms of thinking about different ways in which we can operate in a sustainable way within a supply chain context. So I'm going to move on from there. And obviously, this effectively then becomes an ecosystem, is the best way I can describe it. An ecosystem that effectively is complicated by profit and people. And you'll go, well, why do you mean it's complicated by profit and people? Well, when we start to think about the fact that we're trying to create this equilibrium, but the external factors, in a sense, change the equilibrium point at every single turn of events. So therefore, we are constantly operating in a very dynamic scenario. So what we're trying to do is to think about the way in which the organization has to, because it's essential that it does make some form of profit, because if it doesn't, it ceases to exist. And therefore, it has to generate profit in order to invest in its people, invest in its products, its R&D pipeline, all those kind of things. So from that point of view, it's a critical factor that we must recognize. And so therefore, that equilibrium is a responsibility within our supply chains, because that's what we have to do in terms of balancing all the different factors. When we start to think about some of the key challenges, we start to think about then all the things that are key to us, and particularly in terms of leadership and particularly in terms of academic pursuit. We think about the quality of the data that we've got, the diversity of the data that we've got, the way in which we'll create new data sets often that will allow us to address new problems and new issues. Thinking about the skills that we will need in order to assimilate information, scenarios, new factors, new requirements, new legislation. This dynamic is changing on a regular basis. And if we start to recognize that as organizations, we have to draw that balance between long-term and short-term calls in terms of our strategy. We can't simply pursue either a pure long-term strategy or a pure short-term strategy, because neither would suffice. So we have to get that equilibrium right to suit what we're trying to do. Also, we recognize that, as we're seeing in the world today, there are many political and geostability type issues that we have to deal with, much in the same way that, if you like, the impacts that we saw from COVID-19 came into being and actually upset the balance. And imagine a scenario where, as we did at Rolls-Royce, effective flying hours, which is how we work as an organization, 80% drop in the first 3 months of flying hours has a significant impact in terms of producing new engines, but also in repairing and servicing the engines out there on the wing of aircraft around the world. Recognizing that then creates a significant issue, particularly when you've set up arrangements to have guaranteed minimum quantities of parts so that you can guarantee your production. If you can imagine that your production schedule suddenly changes by 80%, that is a significant impact. So we have to think about some of these challenges and how we will respond to them. Also, we have the reality that we have to face into, which is progress towards the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, over the past 5 years is in decline, and we're unlikely to meet the 2030 targets and objectives. So we have some real challenges in front of us as professionals and scholars to meet that. And how we sort of start to think about that and articulate that is the recognition that we are effectively in what's called a polycrisis. So when we start to think about VUCA and BANI, so the terminology in a sense that's used for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous situations, we start to think about the factors that have hit us over the many years, in the sense that we've seen over the last few years, from COVID to Suez Canal to the Panama Canal, geopolitical instability in the Ukraine and Russia, all those kind of factors then start to have issues in terms of material shortages, container shipping capacity, lockdowns, ports that then are on strike action as they were in the western ports of the US, all the sort of the factors in terms of organizations wanting to then reshore activities, skills building, that, as we said, for different skills, but also the recognition that actually we have to do better in terms of what we call our circular economy. But also that whole recovery piece then starts to come from looking at better ways to collaborate more effectively across our supply chains. One of the things that we've recognized is being more transparent, actually sharing more data than perhaps we've previously been comfortable with, is a real requirement that we have to face into, and recognize that in doing so, we will come up with better solutions. We will come up with options that allow us to understand the collective, if you like, challenges and opportunities that our complex supply chains have, but find what we call mutual or collaborative solutions to those. So therefore, we're starting to recognize that actually we compete as a whole supply chain rather than competing as an entity. And that's a very different concept to the one that we perhaps held in more stable times back in the sort of the 90s, the 2000s, etc., where we had a very stable world socioeconomic environment. Actually, what we're now recognizing is that the reality is that we have to compete as a collective supply chain as opposed to a single entity, because that's predominantly the way in which we're going to navigate our way through this ongoing change and dynamic scenario. So therefore, we do need to recognize that this will be so important, particularly as we move towards a more digitally connected ecosystem of organizations, but also as we recognize legislation, as you'll see in some of the following slides, is beginning to increase significantly. So the skills and behaviors piece, in other words, what I call the shift and embedded piece, which is, if we look at the diagram on the left-hand side, the top 10 fastest growing skills by 2030, according to the World Economic Forum, are AI and big data. And obviously with that then comes lots of things in terms of fake news, fake information, AI hallucinations. So we were having to sort of think about, how are we going to deal with those kind of issues? Networks and cybersecurity, which we know cybersecurity is on the increase. Technological literacy. We have a workforce that I know people in my network who didn't grow up with a computer or a laptop. That wasn't part of it. They didn't have one at home. So getting people like that going into the workplace who are not technologically literate is a huge challenge for us. Now, over periods of time, that will change. But what we have to recognize is that's probably a generational shift, in a sense, that's going to take that. The reality is we don't have a generation that we can sit and wait for that technical literacy to catch up. So that is a skills issue that we need to recognize. One of the things that we've often recognized is this both creative and critical thinking. also our listening skills, the ability to listen sometimes and understand what people are telling us. Managing talent, as I said before, is a huge, huge importance. Flipping onto the right-hand side, and one of the areas that's been a mainstay of my research over many years, which is what we call the behavioral scientists piece, which is to recognize that each individual, me included, we have 200 plus cognitive biases, all of which we map on a scale of 1 to 5. We have what's called our big 5 personality traits, again, all which we map onto a scale of 1 to 5. And we can frame information, what we call positively or negatively. And then we have what we call our heuristics, our life experiences, which we utilize to make decisions. And therefore, this piece of activity, which is our behavioral activity, is at play all the time, particularly when we think that we're making what we refer to as logical and rational decisions, actually have been influenced by lots and lots of behavioral issues in terms of cognitive biases, different decision systems, how communication has been framed in one way or another, life experiences has shaped the way in which we interpret and make decisions on information. And of course, we also have this thing called bounded rationality, which means we only know as much as we know, and therefore the bits that we don't know won't help us to make the decisions that are necessary in complex situations. So in some ways, if we're expecting a rational, logical decision every single time, in other words, everybody all votes and all has preferences exactly the same, we all like the same food, we all like the same drink, etc., is simply not true. And so therefore we have to factor that into the business environment and sustainable supply chains, just in the same way as we have to factor in real life. So when we break this down in terms of skill sets for the future, the way I envisage this is to start to think about what I call in the top right-hand corner, the classical skills for procurement and supply chain professionals, but then start to think about the way in which we then annex to that general set of skills a focus on one specialist area. Now, that might be soft skills, it might be digital skills, it might be ESG and critical thinking, etc. But the reality is that the procurement and supply chain professionals have to think about the way in which they skill themselves for the future, because the classical skills of following processes, adopting project management skills, contract management skills, planning and scheduling, those kind of things, is simply not sufficient for where we're headed to, and particularly as we start to think about more sustainable supply chains, because we need to think about this in a much more comprehensive way. But also the recognition is that many of the things that people are skilling themselves to do or seeking education, mentoring, training, development are often post their first qualifications. So you think about the fact that actually the way in which we work as professionals is very much a journey. It's not a we pass the entry exam, we pass the degree, we pass whatever it happens to be, and that's a stop point. It certainly isn't. That's just simply a recognition that we've arrived at the base level of understanding of what we're doing in procurement and supply chain. The next is the journey that we enter upon in terms of then acquiring sufficient skills to take us further forward. As we start to think about it in the digital transformation area, I start to think about sort of conceptual and conventional skills that we would have on the left-hand side, but some of the newer skills that we're going to have to think about on the right-hand side. And as you can see, we've got this gap between what I call the traditional skills, the classical skills that most people are trained in, but actually the more dominant factors, and particularly as we enter into a more, I'll call it complex, more dynamic world going forward, what we have effectively is to think about those different skills, which led me to sort of create a new taxonomy for the way in which we conceptualize procurement and supply chain professionals. And we start to think about, as I said, those classical skills, but then start to think about then developing a deep specialism in a specific area is probably starting to become more common in the teams and constructs that we get in larger enterprises in particular, where they recognize that they have to have deep specialisms and have to then collaborate effectively across the multiple tiers of their supply chain. So what we're starting to see is this recognition where people say, right, okay, I've got all the classical skills, and you can see those on the left-hand side, but I now need to start to think about where do I want to develop and increase my skill set such that actually I can play a more comprehensive role. And again, you get this sort of what I call sort of travelator, almost in a sense of roles from analyst right the way through up to CPO that has to cover that very broad spectrum of specialisms and skills. And it's a very different way of conceptualizing and thinking about how the procurement and supply chain profession is needing to evolve to address the way in which we need to deliver sustainable supply chain management. So when I start to look at, and we talked about this earlier, and yes, sorry, apologies, this is an eye test like some of the other things possibly I've shown on my slides, but this is the illustration of the new legislation that is coming into force around timelines and regulatory developments and compliance deadlines that we have just for 2025. So that is quite a comprehensive landscape for any one person to get their, if you like, head around and understand the complexity that sits behind this. And hence the reason why we're saying for complex supply chains, where goods and services may originate in one place, they may have first stage manufacturing in another geography, a second stage manufacturing in another, and consumed in a fourth location. The way in which we then start to think about, so where does the legislation apply? Which one do we follow first? Which one takes precedent? Of course, is a very complex way of thinking about what we have to do and how we have to manage supply chains. But the reality is that the regulatory environment is set to increase. Indeed, there are more and more discussions across many continents about the type and I'll call it extent of which the sustainability and ESG legislation will be constructed. But the reality that we're recognizing is that it's not all exactly aligned and connected and interoperable across a complex global supply chain. So this means then that we are going to have to make some very careful considerations and decisions about what we construct where, what we manufacture where, what we ship where, and how we if you like cross effectively country borders and export borders, etc., and import borders, because it will have huge implications for us as organizations, way more complex than when we've probably had before. Now, this may well then start to drive considerations in terms of further reshoring, inshoring, constructing supply chains differently in order that there is a less complex environment. It just looks like my camera is I don't know what's happened, but my camera seems to have decided to stop working. Hopefully, all right, it's come back again. So the reality is that we have to consider this very complex landscape. There is no doubt about that. So, moving on, when I start to then thinking about sort of the things that we have to do, we have to think very carefully about the fact no matter where we originate goods and services, be that raw materials from additive to deductive manufacturing to different production sites to assembly sites, we do have to think about how can we reduce carbon emissions. And this effectively then sets the whole logistics reset, thinking about also reverse logistics, thinking about how we reduce waste generation. We simply don't have the capacity on planet Earth to continue producing waste at the extent that we're currently doing. Equally so, we also need to recognize that we need to find more renewable sources of energy use, and that doesn't necessarily mean just converting everything to electric, because we know that has its own issues associated with rare earth elements and materials, and that's another issue in its own right. Sourcing a sustainable and ethical materials is really important, and obviously observing fair wages and safe working conditions. Obviously, one of the things that all of these things do for us, in a sense, is ultimately we have to think more critically and innovatively about what we're doing and how we're doing it. And if we do that, sometimes just by taking a completely different look at something, and I'm going to share some examples of that in a moment, it means that we can actually achieve many things. And I'll give you an example. Working with another FTSE 250 company in the UK that had multiple international locations, many sort of retail outlets across the world, and the recognition that by simply doing some simple things like challenging the specification of an air conditioning unit, believe it or not, whereby changing the technical specification reduced the energy consumption by 40%, by retiring out all those pieces of equipment that were greater than 15 years old because they're 15% more energy inefficient than the newer versions, and a whole series of measures like that, but putting together then a comprehensive dashboard that says this is the cost that we're saving, this is the CO2 that we're saving, this is the uptime that we're going to have now in the retail outlets because they're no longer shut because we can't put air conditioning in them. All those kind of things starts to recognize that this more collaborative dashboard that we can put into organizations, but in procurement and supply chain, we can act as the catalyst to do those kind of things, is so important. So some examples that, again, if you look at sort of improving demand forecast accuracy, can yield anything between 35 and 90% efficiency through the different case studies that I've looked at. Reducing the spare parts inventory levels, typically from 15 to 55% in 1 year, is possible. Reducing obsolescence, obviously, by different measures, and one of them is on the right-hand side of the page. Obviously, improved efficiency in supply chain related processes, but thinking about the way in which, and Rolls-Royce as a aerospace and defense manufacturer of jet engines, if you think about it, that there can be no failure rate for jet engines. That's just not simply acceptable. By utilizing 3D printing, and particularly as we accelerated this within the COVID period, we recognized that there was no storage, no inventory costs, no redundancy, no obsolescence, and no disruption effectively to shipping. So what that does is it changes the way in which we then do the whole demand planning and forecasting, and starts to identify more and more parts, more and more options. That means then that we have a more sustainable model, particularly for, in this particular instance, manufacturing, than we would have previously. So this sort of different thinking is so important. So another example is in terms of waste management. Here was an example from a case study that I selected. We start to think about the fact that the amount of waste that's generated, we can start to see by directing that in different ways, we can start to increase, recycling rates, incineration to energy, material, and particularly metal recovery, hugely important. In fact, the current statistics are quite alarming in terms of the amount of recovery that we've got on precious and rare earth elements. I think the gold recovery rate was something like 87%, I think it was, which has an obvious connection, if you like. But other materials like lithium, palladium, and things like that were probably down at about 2 to 3%, which means that we're then in a situation, if we look at the sort of the forecasted EV production rates, it means then that we've got to create 300 mega global mines between now and 2035 to meet demand of EV vehicles. So there is a cost to shifting the way in which we provide power and mobility, and we need to recognize that. We can't just simply look at the one part of the equation. Supply chain management must look at the whole equation. So therefore, there is a real shift. Now, I don't know whether this is going to work. I have tried to include, no, it won't work. So sadly, we will share the slides afterwards, but I picked up an example whereby effectively in Asia, they've now created a sofa settee, whatever you call it, in your part of the world, that's called a non-rigid sofa. So effectively, you think about the huge size that a sofa or a settee, 2, 3, or 4 person type settee, they can now actually collapse this with a compression machine, squeeze all the air out of it basically, and package it up, and so it's no bigger than a large cardboard box that's no greater in size than someone standing up, and no longer takes several cubic meters in a shipping container. So massive shift in terms of thinking and approach towards a common item that we see in every single household, but a different way of actually delivering it. So as I said, the challenges for new technologies. We recognize that new sort of vehicles, EV vehicles, take up about 30% of the rare earth market, and there's a big spike in demand as we're seeing even this year, and that surge in clean energy also then exacerbates that. Additionally, the market share for taller and larger wind turbines has risen almost double since 2020, and is set to exceed even those numbers. But if we look at the EV production alone and the boom that is being predicted, we can see that there is an 11-fold increase in 11 years, basically. Now we think about the consequences then of the rare earth elements that are then needed to satisfy that manufacturing demand. They are quite significant. So I'll leave you with that sobering thought. So in essence, when I distill down the thinking about what I call the key things that sustainable supply chain management must absolutely invoke, is a mindset shift. We must develop the skills and the systems that support critical thinking, collaboration. We must be prepared to challenge the status quo. In other words, keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. We're not going to get a different result. We're going to get exactly the same result. We need to design in, right from the outset, circularity. And that circularity must embrace all tiers of the supply chain. It can't simply look at the tier 1 suppliers. It has to look at the complete supply chain and recognize the fact that we aren't just dealing with hard, logical, rational facts, but we're also thinking about all the behavioral things that I talked about earlier in the presentation, which is different people communicate, receive, understand, comprehend information and respond and react differently to the other people. And that's quite normal. However, some of the variations can be quite wide and quite large. And so therefore we need to recognize those. And as I said, we must collaborate with all tiers of the value chain. We can't simply reach into tier one because that's what we've got visibility on, for a number of reasons. Because we won't find the ultimate solutions that we actually need to be more innovative and creative about the way in which we construct our supply chains and value chains. But furthermore, as the demand for more and more information, transparency, and understanding about the ways in which our supply chains operate, and we have to report on those in different geographies and in different instances, we must recognize that we need access to that information, both in terms of data, but also in terms of engagement. And therefore, that will mean that we have to pivot and change the way in which we interact with our supply chains on a broader basis. So, as you can see, lots of prospects, but lots of challenges. And that will continue to challenge us because we recognize that we are still in the polycrisis, that we recognize that we have the factors associated with that, but also the fact that the stability and the consistency that we've probably enjoyed for maybe the best part of 3 decades is over, and that therefore we need to be more agile, flexible, and adaptable going forward. So with that, I'm going to close. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I do post quite a lot on this particular topic. And as Pramod knows, I am the editor-in-chief of 2 journals, Journal of Responsible Production and Consumption and the Journal of Public Procurement. So for any scholars out there and budding academics, please do submit your articles to those journals, because we do look favorably upon articles that are centered around sustainable supply chain management. So with that, I will pass back and leave the guys in Hyderabad to moderate any questions that may have come in.
Sir, before any questions come from the audience, I have one observation, one question maybe for you. We have been talking about responsible production and consumption, and they are contributing to the sustainability. So responsible production, where it is very obvious. So how do you see responsible consumption contributing to the sustainability? You are immensely dealing with numerous papers in this area. So yes. It's just one question from my side, sir.
I think my honest answer to that is that effectively this is a societal change program, if we look at it at the sort of the macro level, which is changing people's habits and behaviors to consume differently. We know certainly from a behavioral science point of view that how can I put it? Human beings effectively are creatures of habit. In other words, they like the routine, and in some ways this is part and parcel of our neurological sort of wiring, if you like, in the brain, which is going back to the days where we were hunters and gatherers. If we hunted in one particular place and we were always successful, we keep going back there. The reality was that the stocks of, if you like, in a sense, wildlife that we could hunt and eat then disappeared. So the uncertainty then came with, so where do I go next? And I guess the same is true in terms of that consumption piece, which is if I've always been able to consume exotic fruits 365 days of the year, I've always been able to consume, luxury goods whenever I wanted to. I could just simply walk into a shop, a store, a location and get that, and I've always been used to that. Suddenly, if that then disappears and somebody says, well, you know what, these exotic fruits, we're only going to put them on the shelf in the season that they are actually ready. Can you imagine what the kickback would be from society and saying, no, we want these things? But that's some of the things that we're going to have to face into and think about going forward. I mean, I remember actually, it's a slightly tangential topic, but in the UK, one of the behavioral insights team recognized that the way in which suicide through drug overdose was happening was a instantaneous thing. So in other words, people would go into a shop, a drugstore, pharmacy, whatever, and buy, how can I put it, all the drugs that they needed to do the dreadful deed. But by changing the behaviors, by saying you can only buy one packet of paracetamol or ibuprofen or something like that in one shop, my medical friends tell me that you had to then go around 6, 7, or 8 shops to gain the amount of medicine, if you like, in a sense, to do something awful like that. What that did was it changed the decision from being a emotional decision to a very conscious decision. And as a consequence, suicides dropped by 43% over a 3-year period. So there are behavioral interventions that we can make that will change the way in which people behave. But we know that effectively what we call loss aversion is one of the biggest things to challenge the society in terms of removing something that we've already enjoyed and had for many, many years, and then suddenly losing it is one of the biggest challenges that we face. And this is going to be a really hard challenge. So to your point, I think that the recognition is that, yes, we are going to have to address the consumption piece, but there are no quick fixes and there are no easy answers. And if we recognize that and recognize that this is going to be a part of a complex approach to doing that sort of thing, then I think we're in a more realistic place. But the reality is that perhaps as we experienced in COVID, suddenly things that we enjoyed just disappeared overnight, and therefore we very quickly learned that hey, we have no control over this situation. Maybe in some ways that's a lesson around sort of maybe some of the things that we did. I mean, some of the things that people said was not many people use Teams and Google Meet and Zoom and all those kind of things up until COVID. And then literally 2 years later, everybody's going, no, I don't want to go back to the office. I just want to use Zoom and Teams. And so that shift, we can do it on a large scale, but it requires some very big intervention and collaboration across multiple channels and multiple geographies to achieve.
Sir, there are a few more questions in the chat box. Are you able to see them, sir, in the comments?
I can't. I'll have a look and see if I can find them.
Yeah, you can stop sharing your screen.
All right. Okay. Yeah,
then
we do
I think that will be better. You can see it better.
Yeah.
There are a couple of questions in the comment box.
Yeah. Does that do it?
Yeah. Are you able to see now, sir?
Yes, I am. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So starting with Ranjani Hugar, 748. So please.
748. Okay. It's coming through in my time, so unfortunately, it's
yeah. I'm sorry.
Just to make it interesting.
I'm sorry. Shall I read it out?
Yeah. So you read out which one then you want me to pick up. Sorry,
what role do digital technologies and the data analytics play? What role? I repeat. What role do digital technologies and the data analytics play in enhancing supply chain visibility and agility? And how can these be leveraged to improve resilience against unforeseen events?
I think it will play a pivotal role, and again, I think the way in which I would see this, it's almost like saying we have to create a cross-functional team in order to solve more complex problems. And so therefore, it's a very legitimate seat at that sort of cross-functional team table. I think the one thing that I would say, though, is to recognize that I have an expression which is called, sometimes we have to, as individuals, make sense and translate what we know for others sitting around that table. So what I would advocate is finding the ways in which we can translate that information into ways and formats and configurations that other people that sit around that cross-functional table will understand. So we think about all the different stakeholders, we think about all the different sort of actors and players within the whole supply chain. They will be viewing this information from a different position. They won't, and I'll give you an example, a very simple example where you've got marketing people who are very visual. You give them a spreadsheet and it's almost like they switch off. You give a finance analyst, a very graphical sort of, image or something like that, and they'll say, give me a spreadsheet. So I know that's a very simple and generalistic analogy, but we have to recognize that in utilizing that data and that information, we've got to format it in different ways for different people and audiences to be able to understand it in a parallel way that others can that are sitting around that table. And I think that's hugely important.
Thank you, sir. One more question from Mr. Venkat. What are the different industries expected to adopt 3D printing globally? Any correlation for AI roles in the 3D printing?
Well, I think if you can think about, I'll give you an example. So you take shipping, automotive, even equipment. So I remember very vividly prior to 3D printing, I lived and worked in Latin America for about 4 years. And we had huge problems in getting replacement parts for very complex pharmaceutical equipment. Had we had 3D printing, that would have been absolutely fantastic. So you can see there in an instant that replacement parts could be developed along with a series of instructions then how to, take a machine offline, replace that part, and reset the machine and get it running again without then having to wait. Literally, in some cases, it would take 6 to 8 weeks just to clear customs in Latin America, let alone then transport it from, say, somewhere in Europe to get it to somewhere in Latin America. So it was a very complex supply chain. Having the ability to be able to produce that on site would have been a massive leap forward, not just in terms of sustainability, but also in terms of service and support to the operation in the country.
One more question, sir, from Ranjani Hugar again. How can companies effectively balance cost efficiency with resilience in their supply chain design, considering the increasing frequency and the severity of the disruptions?
Ooh. I think you have to take them on a case-by-case basis, quite frankly. I don't think you can say that there is a one-size-fits-all formula that would give you the answer. I really do think that you have to look at this on a case-by-case basis. And again, what you have to examples that come to my mind is if you think about equipment for an end customer, and I'll give you an example in the pharmaceutical industry. We had equipment that was producing drugs that would make £1 million a day profit. If that machine is down for 24 hours, the cost of the part might be £10,000 more or dollars more or whatever it happens to be. But actually the impact on the profitability for the organization is hugely significant and totally outweighs the cost of the part. So you have to put this into context in terms of saying, what is the situation that I am trying to understand and make a decision on. So it's understand the complete context. So taking that out of context, you could easily make the wrong decision, which is it's going to cost me 5 times more to air freight something. Well, that might be true, but actually if it saves 50 times more profit, then you're going to do it. And so therefore, the context to all of those decision making is hugely important.
Sir, thank you, sir. Mr. Purushot R, his question is any recommendation for the future research?
So could you repeat that one for me? Sorry.
Any recommendation for the future research and with the sector, with the specified sector? He's asking, and with the sector.
I think my sense is that the more that we can harvest and illustrate some of the case studies around how we've invoked sustainable supply chain management principles and share those. And I would also advocate that they're developed in a way that they are, how can I put it, meet academic rigor, but can also be translated so that they can have practitioner advantage, if you like. So in other words, they can be consumed by practitioners out in the field. You know as well as I do that we have to write academic papers in a certain style and in a certain way, but that's not readily accessible, particularly if they're behind a paywall, to practitioners. So therefore, we have to find ways of getting that, what I call that duality, between academic rigor and practitioner expediency and requirement, in a way that can then be picked up and readily assimilated and utilized and put into effect. And I think this collaboration, as I call it, between academia and practitioners is so important, and that we must seek to do more of that.
One last question, sir. Dr. Raghavendran, his question is how AI takes place in supply chain design and the process. Maybe how AI helps supply chain design and the process.
Yeah, it's interesting how we've had many debates on this, and particularly even at within the academic journals, as well as in the sort of what I would call in the design and development processes in organizations. I think it does have a place, but again, what I would say is that obviously, there are now different forms of AI taking place in terms of agentic AI. There's different forms of AI being produced, and so I think as confidence grows in the tasks and things that it can do, then I think it will begin to expand. But the recognition always has to be, how can I put it? If you're putting it into a context and a situation that has never been encountered before, it's unlikely that historical information and outcomes are going to help you sufficiently. So what you have to recognize is that there are still limitations behind AI, but there are also benefits. I mean, one of the obvious benefits, particularly as somebody who speaks multiple languages, is the fact that we know that we can utilize this as a means of making sure that we can produce information in different languages, more grammatically correct, more how can I put it, more accessible in terms of its language, its structure, grammatically, those kind of things, absolutely. But also we can get it to critique specifications. We can get it to critique flows. We can get it to look at options and efficiencies that have been recorded in other places, and go, have you thought about this? What about this? As a way of, I'll call it a catalyst to critical thinking in supply chain management, and particularly in terms of the instance of design. And somebody saying, well, I mean, like the instance that I couldn't unfortunately show you, which is an embedded link on the presentation, that shows you that somebody has developed a way of creating a piece of furniture that is wholly collapsible, and is a different way of manufacturing that piece of furniture. Now, that piece of information transposed into different design processes would be invaluable to getting to somebody to think about this in a different way, particularly if then they're not shipping 3-4 cubic meters of fresh air. They're shipping probably at best half a cubic meter, that's a massive benefit to the person, but also a benefit then to the production process, right the way from the factory gate to the end customer. So there's lots of ways in which this can be utilized. So I think that, again, I think it's about saying, it's a bit like collaboration, really. It's about that collaboration between human and artificial intelligence, rather than just saying we just leave artificial intelligence to do everything on its own. No, I think it's a collaboration, and I generally think that this is how AI will begin to scale and become more applicable and effective, particularly in the instance that's cited in terms of design and planning and those kind of things. It will start to augment and become more important.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. You have answered all the questions.
Thank you.
So there are no more questions in the chat box. Thank you very much, sir, from the bottom of our heart. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you with our Dean of the school, Professor GVR Acharyelu. Professor Acharyelu, we have with us Professor David Losby.
Yeah, namaste ji.
University of Leeds.
Good morning, good
Good
morning.
afternoon, sir. For them, it's
afternoon.
around
Thank you.
2:30 or so.
Yeah, nice to see you. Excellent session, and I have been a part of the session for last 10 to 15 minutes. So the questions you have answered is really great, and would like to have your partnerships and association with our School of Management Studies. Of course, Pramod Kumar Mishra is doing great things from supply chain and operations area.
Yes.
And would like to work together in future and
I
see
hope
that
so.
how do we do best to the supply chain community.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. And I wish you every success with the program. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Catch you again in some other time. And I hope the similar cooperation we can expect in the future events as well.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Have a
Bye-bye.
nice day. Have a nice day. Sir, thank you very much. Sir, we'll just give some 3-4 minutes of a break and we can start.
Yes,
sir.
yes.
Yeah. So participants will have a quick break of 3-4 minutes and then we can start the presentation by Professor GVR Acharyelu, sir. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Just 3-4 minutes, sir. Take a quick break, everyone. Shall we go ahead, sir? Shall we proceed, sir?
Yeah,
Sir, shall we proceed?
yeah.
I'll just briefly introduce you, sir, and then you can start, sir.
Is it audible?
Yes, sir,
Coming.
audible. It's very much audible, and you are also clearly visible.
Yeah.
And I'll just briefly introduce you, sir, then you can take over, sir.
Okay, right.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Welcome back, everyone. So it's once again my pleasure to introduce with all of you Professor GVR Acharyelu. Currently, he is working as a professor and professor in the area of operations, supplies, and management at the School of Management Studies, and he's also serving as the dean of the school. With a brief profile of sir, he has done his bachelor's in chemical engineering from Andhra University, and his master degree from Arish Warangal. He holds an MBA from Osman University and PhD in the same area from Osman University again. He has over 30 years of experience in teaching and more than 10 years of industry experience in operations in the supply chain management area. Sir has Sir's scholars are especially doing well. They have published in very good journals. Recently, they have published in one A category journal in terms of ABDC journal list, Australian Business Teams Council journal list. And Sir has produced, I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, sir, about 15 scholars he has produced so far, and few are still
No,
pursuing
it's
their
10,
PhD.
10, 10.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. It's around 10, and few more are on currently pursuing their PhD under SARS guidance. So, with this brief note, we welcome sir, and sir's presentation will be basically on the sustainable practices in the healthcare supply chains. So, with this note, we welcome you, sir, once again, and thank you very much. Despite your busy schedule, you voluntarily came forward to present this. I know sir was quite occupied even till 7:30, so I could not even see him for a while today. So despite your busy schedule, you are able to make it to the event, sir. We are very much thankful to you. So now I leave the session to you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Can
You
I
can
share
start
the
sharing your
presentation?
screen, sir. You can share your screen, sir.
Can I share the presentation?
Yes, sir. Please, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Share the screen, huh?
Yes, sir. Share the screen. Then entire screen, sir. In case you change anything, then it will be visible.
Are you able to see?
Yes, sir. It's visible, sir. Go to the first one, sir. First up, go to the presentation, sir. Change the slide, sir. Yeah. Yeah, it's clearly visible, sir. You can proceed.
Yeah.
Nice, sir. Nice. Thank you.
So very good evening to all of you and some of you. Good morning from global participants. So thank you, Misha, for introducing. And it is our the program, the MDP program we are conducting for the third consecutive year with Pramod Kumar Mishra and Merit One Mr. Venkatji. So with the association with the US company, and it is our endeavor to disseminate our knowledge on supply chain areas. So thanks to the participant for registering. And my topic is on supply chain practice in healthcare supply chains. So here the sustainable practice, I think for the last so many sessions you have been hearing about what is sustainability, what is triple bottom line, and how it is so important, how the entire it is a global issue, and each country has to raise to the occasion to meet the sustainability goals. And 17 goals you might have seen. So I'll not be repeating those things, but the important aspects is in healthcare supply chain. Healthcare supply chain is totally different from it's one of the typical service supply chain compared to other manufacturing supply chains. Where in the manufacturing supply chain you have a The customer is different. Here, the customer is different. The customer is having a pain point in healthcare supply chain, where the customer in the manufacturing sector is different. So now this that's why the health is very important for any individual to survive on the planet. So the healthcare. So my presentation is going to be initially, I'll be giving you the overview of the healthcare supply chain, and then sustainable healthcare supply chain. Then what are the different practices that are going to be there, and finally some Indian examples I'm going to give you. This is how the presentation is going to be, and mostly in healthcare supply chain. So in India is going to be at the beginning stage. So of course, some of the pockets they are going to attend under sustainability aspects, but hospitals and healthcare, other organized pharmaceutical industries, they need to adopt in a big way to meet the sustainable goals. So in India, it is at the nation stage, but still there are some practices are being followed so far. And how do you make it intensify these things? And what is the order of the day? How the sustainability is important, and how do we live together on the planet, safeguarding each other? That's very important. So this is how my presentation is going to be there. So initially, I'll be giving you about healthcare supply chain. So mostly, what is supply chain? You know it, but from the supply chain point of view, this is how the healthcare supply chain. So the healthcare supply chain, if you see, this is a linear supply chain. If you see here, production, distribution, consumption. So this is material flow. Ultimately, the focus is towards patient. And here again, there is a reversible flow, that is manufacture, equipment manufacture, and pharmaceuticals, drugs, and other materials. So these manufacturers to distributors, and then distribute to providers, hospitals, healthcare organizations. So now, so here there is a reversible flow. So there, the entire supply chain is going to be having a material flow, information flow, and financial flow. So all these flows are reversible, and then you can see the entire healthcare supply chain is going to be patient-centric supply chain. This is very important. So if you see the standard definition of healthcare supply chain, it is going to be coordinating and integrating production and procurement and distribution and consumption of healthcare supplies and services. That's why it is a complex network. An healthcare supply chain consists of many supply chains. Network of suppliers, and suppliers are going to have their supply chain, and distributors, distribution network, and finally to the healthcare providers, hospital supply chain, then towards patient care. This is how the supply chain is going to be there. This healthcare supply chain is more prominent during COVID-19 pandemic. So that's why so how do we manage the patient care? So many patients, many people are affected with the COVID. So what kind of care that is required? What are the hospitals giving a standard care, standard COVID protocol care, and how different scarcity of materials and demand has become very high, and supply has been limited due to various reasons. And ultimately, how do you look at high quality of patient care and protecting the safety of the health professional? So patient safety, and also at the same time, healthcare professional. So this is how the healthcare supply is more prominent during COVID, and post-COVID, it has become more and more important to look at the sustainability aspects in healthcare. So if you see there are different models are available in healthcare supply chain. Just I'll be showing you. So the suppliers and medical supply and equipment manufacturers and pharmaceutical companies, then distribution centers, then hospitals, clinics, then drugstores and retailers, then customers. This is a kind of a basic understanding of healthcare supply chain. And also in this supply chain, if you see pharmaceutical supply chain will be there, and warehouse distribution is there, and hospital supply chain is there, and the supply of consumables like chemicals, they have their own supply chain. So it's integration of all partners, different supply chains in one supply chain. So that's why this is upstream healthcare supply chain, this is a downstream healthcare supply chain. So how are you going to integrate this? This is our simple understanding of supply chain. But if you see other models also, if you see, are you able to see this model?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Visible, sir. Visible.
So this is again, you can see the typical stakeholders in the hospital supply chain. There are suppliers, as we discussed, and then buying groups, then supermarkets, then IT providers, then health insurance companies, and pharmacies, home care providers. So these are the different entities or stakeholders. And at the middle, you have this is a healthcare provider. So it is going to be regulated by government bodies and industry groups and other service providers like housekeeping, cleaning, catering, all these things. So ultimately, finally, it is going to be supported by distributors, blood banks, and hospitals, public and private hospitals, and third-party transport providers, and aged care facilities, and private medical clinics, and general practitioner surgeries, GP surgeries. So these are the different stakeholders that you can see in the hospital supply chain. Then now, what is healthcare supply chain? This is going to be very important. How you manage processes in the business, procurement of raw materials to manufacturing to delivery of final product to customers. So entire supply chain is the purpose, the goal of supply chain is how do you minimize the cost and how do you minimize the middlemen, how are you going to control the quality and also faster delivery times, responsive, how the supply chain is responsive to the patient care. That's why these flows are different types, and also the production phase that you can see medical supplies and products are sent to the distributors and then subsequently brought to the hospitals and then healthcare institutions where goods are stocked and made by the patient. This is how the understanding of healthcare supply chain you have seen from the earlier diagram also. So coming to this another definition of hospital supply chain. So hospital supply chain means again from the standard definition of supply chain. So now from the context of healthcare hospital point of view, how do you efficiently integrate suppliers or vendors, your transportation network, and hospital services, including outpatient, emergency, inpatients, professionals, laboratory tests, radiology, like clinical services and support services, and other purchases, and hospital operations, laundry, and MIS through online web-related technologies to achieve TQM in healthcare services by optimum utilization of resources. This is one definition of a hospital supply chain. Of course, other definition is also it is management of materials, equipment, manpower, like doctors, nurses, and other supporting staff, and hospital services to transform the sick patient to healthy person at a reasonable cost in the shortest possible time with utmost satisfaction to the patient. So this is how the entire hospital supply chain is very crucial to the healthcare supply chain. So in the healthcare supply chain, hospital supply chain is a sub-component very critical because the ultimate patient care is going to happen in the hospital and other supply chains are going to be the inputs to the hospital supply chain. This is, you can see other model that is available. So you can also identify from this diagram, patient at the center. Now, near to the patient, there is a recovery, treatment, diagnostics, and prevention will be there. And other layer, Next layer is you have different services, theaters, radiology, cath lab, ICU and dialysis center, accidents and emergencies, pharmacy and also. Then next layer is supporting water treatment, cleaning, medical consumables, waste devices, biomedical engineering, security and recycle. And then outpatients. Outpatients and health center, connected health centers, diagnosis centers, clinics, domiciliary care. So all these things, different stakeholders that you can see are connected in the entire supply chain to see that how do you generate value to the customer while creating value, while improving the value at every stage of the supply chain. Now, in the supply chain, if you see hospitals, if you see here, so there are distribution agents and pharmacy outlets. Hospitals are linked, and suppliers and vendors. So they are equipment and machinery and consumables, cartons, frames, furnitures, chemicals, spare parts, and so on and so forth. So these distributors are linked to hospitals, and also suppliers and vendors also linked to hospital. And if you see suppliers and suppliers and suppliers, hospital supply is connected to suppliers and suppliers. So if you see, this is how the formulations. After the formulations, the distribution agents and pharmacy outlet will take care of supplying drugs to the hospitals. But before, how this formulation is going to be linked to the distribution agents of pharmacy outlets. Then bulk drugs plant. So pharmacy outlets are again linked to the bulk drug plant. So bulk drug plant is again linked to chemicals and oils, manufacturing industry. Again, it is linked to natural resources like minerals, oils. And then chemical and equipment material supplies are going to be linked to chemical industries. And again, all these industries are paper industry, printing industry, rubber containers, tins, foils, all these things are ancillary subsidiary industries that are connected to healthcare material. So these are linked to the formulations, and then again, all formulations require rubber and plastic and other things, foils and also. So these are linked. So ultimately, so there is a demand, bulk drug plant, there is a demand, supply and demand, R&D will be there. Then the suppliers, again, if you see suppliers and vendors there, again linked to glass factory, ceramic factory, cotton, electrical industries. Ultimately, another entity is ambulance. So ambulance is also linked to hospitals. Ultimately, satisfied patient is happy patient is coming out. So these are the entire hospital supply chain. You can see how hospital is connected to different network. If you see suppliers. So finally, this is the end customer, patient. How patient is going to be treated in the hospital based on the support from other linkages in all the supply chains. This is how you can understand supply chain, healthcare supply chain. And if you see here, again, one more model to get you more understanding about hospital supply chain. So here, this is patient inbound. Patient is entering into the hospital. He may be taking care in the operation theater. Let us say the patient requires operation. This operation theater is supported by the stores required material and the recovery ward, then patient outbound. So this is going to be supported by working store and bulk store. This bulk store is going to be coming from medical surgical items, sutures, syringes, catheters, stents, and other things. So this is going to be having a hospital stock and consignment stock, then pharmaceutical drugs and medications. Blessed, all these things are inputs to this hospital system, and there procurement and non-clinical supplies, paper, toner, and cleaning, etc., will be done at the central level, and procurement of high-tech and special equipment assets, procurement, catering, supplies, all these things are purchasing aspects. So if you have again staff and labor inputs, again physicians, nurses, and all that things. and how it is going to operate. So again, financial system, patient records, other systems are going to be linked to this system, hospital system. So this is how you can understand another way of hospital supply chain, how a patient care is going to be delivered through various stages in the supply chain to see that how do you maximize the value to the customer. And of course, these are also other things that we've already seen this hospital supply chain. Again, subcontinent of healthcare supply chain, subcomponent, and wholesalers, distributor, third-party transport providers, blood banks, hospitals, patent public, private medical clinics, GP surgeries, home care, and other services like catering, cleaning, government regulations, health insurance companies, IT solution providers, supermarkets, pharmacies, all these things. These are all different stakeholders. So who are going to be connected to the various activities and at various stages, which are seamlessly connected to see that how delivery is going to be efficient and effective. Another way of seeing the diagram is these health aids and medical surgical supplies and medical devices, then office supplies, clothing, all these are supplies part. These supplies part are going to be supplied. The material will be supplied to hospital center warehouse, then distributor, then delivered to hospital, to patient. So this hospital is going to have a purchasing policy, purchasing company, or you can say medical purchasing company. So it is going to aggregate all the requirements of the different hospitals and it is going to deliver to the distributor or directly to the hospital and laboratory, connected to laboratory diagnostics center. So you can see these lines, daily deliveries and annual deliveries. Some of the deliveries are annual deliveries, depends on the consumption levels at different stages. So this is how you can see different flows, material flow, financial flow, and also information flow that you can identify. Now, that is what simple understanding about hospital supply chain. But if you see the sustainability aspect in healthcare, the meaning is very simple. So from the Brundtland Commission standard definition that is arrived from, healthcare that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of others in future or elsewhere now to meet their own needs. This is how the sustainable healthcare simple understanding, and also this is how you can define. Coming to this, what is a sustainable supply chain? And again, you can see the sustainability you have seen. So you have a triple bottom line: economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability. So all these things are creating a sustainable supply chain. So this is going to be all the three parameters are going to be factors are going to be integrated in the supply chain strategies. How to manage the life cycle of goods and services. That's very important. So here the thing is role of sustainability in healthcare. So ultimately the healthcare service focuses on reducing environmental impact, improving patient health, and ensuring cost-effective operations to provide long-term benefits. This is the role of sustainability in healthcare. If you see the drivers, environmental concerns. So environmental concerns are going to look at to mitigate the negative impact, such as pollution, resource depletion, resource constraints, and climate change through sustainable practices. Coming to the economic benefits, also one of the important drivers. This includes cost savings from efficient resource utilization. How do you minimize the waste and also enhance the profitability from sustainable operations? So you have to minimize the waste, reuse, reduce, and recycle. Then coming to the social sustainability, this is very important, social aspect. So this is going to look at the ethical practices of the company towards society. How are you going to treat the employees? How are you going to treat the community? And are you really paying equitable fair wages, and are the really engaged community is engaged, and also ultimately it should contribute to the societal well-being. These are social responsibilities. So safety, security, and other aspects have to be considered. So this is how. So if you look at many hospitals, so how they are going to take care of their social responsibility and economic benefits and environmental concerns. If all the factors are taken into consideration, so the hospital supply chain is highly sustainable. But still, if you see what are the gaps that you can see, those gaps are really improvement factors for improving the efficiency. So these are the supply chain sustainability. How do you look at environmental and human aspect of products journey through supply chain from raw material sourcing to, so this the standard supply chain definition is going to be added with environmental and human impact that you have to take into consideration, and also economic impact. Ultimately, how do you minimize the environmental harm like energy usage, water consumption, waste production, while having a positive impact on the people and communities, social responsibility in and around operations. These concerns are in addition to traditional corporate supply chain concerns around revenue and profit. It is not that supply chain is not only for profit, but also they should be socially responsible and environmental concern, and all at the same time economic stability. So that's why sustainable supply chain is a strategic business decision that is going to have sustainable sourcing, because when you're looking at suppliers from starting from raw materials, suppliers, sustainable sourcing, production, packaging, and optimized and reasonable delivery of produced goods. So here, every stage you have to take into consideration. It's not that one particular area you have to improve all these things. So every stage you have to create a value in every stage. That value is going to be finally aggregated. So yeah, as we discussed, the primary role of health systems and hospital is to heal patients, and healthcare organizations do much harm to the environment. This is how many of you are going to accept, because it is happening. So while caring the patient, curing the disease, at the same time, there is a harm that is happening to the environment. So if you see the many components that go into the patient care or care delivery, so buildings, infrastructure, equipment, instruments, logistics, transportation, equipment, biomedical equipment, any consumables, and MRI, CT scan, and electronic devices, so many, so on and so forth. All these things, part of healthcare delivery, those result in substantial energy consumption. ACs, HVAC, cooling towers, and steam generation, boilers. So all these things, of course, boiler is going to generate steam, but it consumes some energy. At the same time, greenhouse gas emissions, GH, greenhouse, GHS, greenhouse gas emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and waste. So waste, like different waste, biomedical waste, and non-recyclable waste, and other wastes are available in the hospital. So these wastes are creating a lot of damage to the environment. Sometimes chemical wastage. So along with the chemical, lot of lead material is going away, which is going to harm the environment. So that's why, how do we? So at the same time, the hospitals are contributing to create health to the individuals, at the same time damage to the environment. So those things are very important in terms of energy consumption, greenhouse gas emissions, and waste, and so on and so forth. So in healthcare supply chain, So environmental damage and social injustice are happening, that you know it. But if you see sustainable healthcare management practices, our sustainable practice in healthcare supply chain, this is the topic. So ultimately the goal is to see that how do you reduce the negative impacts? How do you minimize the waste? How do you minimize the energy consumption? How do you minimize the greenhouse gases, pollutants? So that's why at the same time it is going to cut the cost. But if you maintain sustainable practice, automatically it's going to minimize the waste, automatically creating a value, and finally you can minimize the cost also. But initial investment will be high. So healthcare supply chain, we have seen it spans many stakeholders, both inside and outside the healthcare organizations that we have seen. All play a role in ensuring the availability of equipment, supplies available per patient for efficient care. So right material, right equipment, right price, right person, right time, all these things. Everything's all are coming into picture in the healthcare supply chain. If you see, all these stakeholders are coordinating each other, and finally to see that how they are going to integrate their operations activities to improve the healthcare supply chain sustainability. So ultimately it is the sustainability or sustainable supply chain practices not only contribute well-being of patient of the planet, but also enhance the overall efficiency and resilience of healthcare organizations. So resilience is very important during COVID environment. So how our healthcare system is resilient, how we are able to manage in spite of so many difficulties we faced, and you are going to become a robust, and how do you develop that kind of resilient supply chain. So now another aspect is healthcare supply chain also looks at how to balance the delivery of medical supplies and services with environmental and social and economic sustainability. So this is only supply side of medical components and services. This is one important balancing point you should maintain in the supply chain, healthcare supply chain, sustainable healthcare supply chain. So here what happens is, how are you going to look at addressing the challenges such as material shortages, inventory problems, material shortages, environmental impacts, and other ethical labor practices. This sustainable supply chain, healthcare supply chain, not only ensures the efficient provision of healthcare, but also emphasizes the importance of sustainable global community. How are you going to, when you're saving your communities, saving your community, you're part of contributing to the global environment. So that's how the integrated effect will be there. If you look at the sustainable supply chain, hospitals take a holistic view because the patient is there in a hospital, and how different products life cycles are going to be moving towards patient care. That's very important to reduce. Ultimately, you have to identify opportunities for reducing waste, save energy, and leverage ethical suppliers. That is creating a win-win environment to the environment and community and bottom line. So a sustainable hospital supply chain, if you see, ensuring the suppliers' procurement, delivery, storage, and disposal happen in ways that minimize the environmental impact. All these things, very frequently you are hearing about this environmental impact, ethical labor practices, and to create a strong health system resilience. So now you have to think beyond costs and benefits. Ultimately, sustainable supply chain, healthcare supply chain management is to look at how do you look beyond the costs and benefits to the entire life cycle of the products hospital use from production to disposal. This sustainable hospital supply chain is not about ensuring hospital function optimally. It has a societal implications, as we discussed. how do you develop healthy communities with uninterrupted access to healthcare services while promoting well-being and fostering environment to conduct to societal growth and development. This is again understanding about sustainable hospital supply chain management. How you are going to see this sustainable hospital supply chain and how we are going to create an efficient and environmentally friendly, socially responsible, and economically viable. Now, if you see the conventional supply chain management focused on speed, cost, delivery, responsiveness of operations, all these things. But sustainable supply chain adds the goals of environmental, societal values. So when you are contributing to the sustainable environment, sustainable aspects of the supply chain, you are contributing to the global issues as a climate change, water security, deforestation, human rights, fair labor practice, and corruption. Now, the sustainable supply chain management is put into practice right from the procurement of goods, services to delivering the right products to the right time. Again, of course, we have already discussed this. Sustainability encompasses practices ensuring present needs are met without jeopardizing the future generations' capabilities. In supply chain, this requires upstream and downstream activities. How do we integrate upstream and downstream activities in not that one particular stream that you are going to look at? Upstreams are going to involve procurement and supplier relations, and how do we minimize the scarce resources and ethical sourcing practices. Downstream is going to be how are you going to look at the product distribution, highlight the pollution, risks, transportation, policies, and environmental aspects. Sustainability-oriented management system align regulatory compliance, voluntary certifications, ethical incentives, and competitive advantage through cost reduction based management. So these things we'll discuss little later. So healthcare and sustainable development. So you know the Paris Agreement, the sustainability term has evolved in mitigating the climate change and fostering sustainability aligns directly with the healthcare sector. Goals for improving health outcomes while minimizing environmental impacts. So sustainable healthcare development and supply chain practices are very, very critical to ensure resilient, efficient, and equitable systems that support both planetary and human health. If you see sustainable development and healthcare, the first part is climate change and healthcare. So healthcare sector is both a contributor to and victim of climate change. So it is contributing, if you see, 4.4% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So primarily to energy use, supply chain activities like transportation, and then waste generation. Then climate-related health impacts such as heat waves, vector-borne diseases, pollution-related illness, increase the burden on the healthcare systems, particularly in vulnerable regions. So aligning healthcare practices with the Paris Agreement goals reduce the emissions. Ultimately, how do you give more focus to the emissions, reduction in the emissions while improving the climate resilience? Then sustainable development goals. Second part is sustainable development is in the goal. So you have a sustainable development goal 3 and 6 and 7 are aligning to the healthcare area. So climate mitigation and adaptation reduce the prevalence of climate sensitive diseases and ensure healthier environment. That is SDG 3. SDG 6 is going to look at maintain a hygienic healthcare environment, creating a healthy society. Then SDG 7 is going to transitioning healthcare facility to renewable energy sources. How do you improve the sustainability and operational efficiency? So now, if you look at what are the challenges in healthcare supply chains. So extensive supply chains in pharmaceuticals, medical device, and consumables contribute significantly carbon emissions. This is very important in healthcare supply chains. So pharmaceutical organizations, medical devices, consumables are creating more carbon emissions. So over reliance on, this is also I'll be discussing a little later. Over reliance on single-use plastics and inefficient logistics amplify environmental impacts. Single uses use and throw, that also creating environmental impact. And also the vulnerabilities in supply chain during climate-related disruptions like extreme weather events. That is to access to essential medicines and equipment. This is one challenge. Of course, Paris Agreement driven supply chain in healthcare, decarbonizing of procurement. How do you look at this? Sustainable procurement, decarbonizing of procurement, transitioning to suppliers that adhere to low carbon manufacturing practices. So suppliers also maintain the sustainable practices, low carbon emission practice, and also they have to supply the materials to the hospital through transportation with a eco-friendly packaging, eco-friendly products, eco-friendly components and parts. So implementing green procurement policies, minimizing the waste to prioritize the sustainable products and materials. That's very important. In energy efficiencies, optimizing logistics and transportation to reduce emissions, carbon emissions. Then transitioning to electric to hybrid fleets for medical supply distribution. Again, electric vehicles can be used for reducing the emissions. And again, one more concept that is called circular economy. So how do you adopt recycling, reusing, refurbishment practice in medical devices? So refurbishing is you're going to modify the existing equipment and use some kind of parts which are useful and recycle it and reuse it. Reducing dependency on the single-use items without compromising the safety and quality. This is also one of the important. So circular economy is like a closed-loop economy. So you are going to look at the forward logistics and reverse logistics and see that the waste that is coming out from the product and services are going to be recycled to the original supply. So, these are the innovations happened through Paris Agreement. That is renewable energy usage has become a lot of importance. So hospitals and clinics powered by solar and wind energy reduce the dependency of fossil fuels. So solar for health initiatives in Africa's rural health clinics ensuring uninterrupted care. Of course, in Indian hospitals also, there's so many states are implementing solar for health. And sustainable pharmaceuticals, that is green chemistry practice in drug manufacturing, reducing environmental effect. That means green chemistry means the molecule that you are going to use should not generate waste and heat. And efforts to minimize waste usage and chemical discharge align with the Paris Agreement environment goals. Then resilient healthcare infrastructure. Again, climate resilient hospital designed to withstand the extreme weather conditions like green building and all these things. Incorporating sustainable materials and energy efficient systems construction. So why sustainable supply chain is important? It helps reduce environmental impact that you know and brings continuous improvement in the supply chain and improves company partnerships. It's not that one person is going to contribute sustainable supply chain practices. So it is partnership. Through partnership, suppliers should cooperate and your system should cooperate. All these things. Then create win-win situation, promotes a conducive work culture so that you are contributing to the environment, betterment of environment, and also in implementing CSR activities, corporate social responsibility activities, increasing the company's goodwill image, and how much a company is going to, how much an hospital, healthcare organization is contributing to carbon emissions, reducing the carbon emissions, and sustainable practice that increase the company's goodwill also. Helps develop better supply chain risk mitigation techniques. So you can also see that if any kind of supply chain interruptions happens, disruption happen in the entire supply chain. So how are you going to cope up with those interruptions, disturbances? So then sustainable supply chain, who, why, what, how. If you see this, why means you have seen the drivers. What are the drivers? That means forces motivating organizations to implement reverse logistics. Example, cost saving, legal compliance, customer demand, sustainability goals. All these things are different drivers which are contributing why you have to go for sustainable supply chains. Then if you see who are the stakeholders, stakeholders are going to be, you have seen the supply chain partners. And if you see the reverse flow means whenever the product is consumed by the customer, so the waste is not going to be disposed of. Then it has to be collected, returned. All these returned items you have to select, sort what type of waste it is going to be there, and you have to send it to the remanufacturing and recycling them. This is how these people are going to be the stakeholders who are the waste management processors, waste management reassemblers, remanufacturers, assemblers. All these things are stakeholders in seeing that how your waste that is going to be regenerated, recycled. Like logistic providers, manufacturers, recyclers, and customers. Customers also going to be contributors of this stakeholders. What products? Then what comes to the what products, materials, packaging that is involved. So packaging makes a difference. What kind of environmental friendly materials, packaging, green packaging, products also, waste minimization will be there, no waste will be there, and environmental friendly products. All these things are what part, whether to meet the cost effectiveness and legal requirements and uphold ethical and environmental aspects. Then how part is process methods. What are the methods? Reusing, remanufacturing. So you are designing a product in such a way that your process in such a way that there should be a scope for reusing, remanufacturing that enable valuable recovery. What is the recovery that you are going to have? Recovery, return items, guiding how resources are recaptured and waste is minimized. This is about entire supply chains, sustainable supply chain for why, who, what, and how. So, what are the sustainable practices? Now, coming to sustainable practice in healthcare, prioritizing supplies with waste reduction initiatives, sourcing from local supplies to shortest distances, short distances to short transportation routes, and low carbon emissions. And local suppliers also will enable immediate availability of material at shorter distance. Using renewable energy sources, this is also one important aspect. That means you have to substitute with the renewable sources. Implementing green packaging, reducing waste through efficient procurement, collaborating with sustainable suppliers, establishing clear sustainable goals, and re-engaging stakeholders throughout the supply chain to monitor environmental impact. So entire chain, supply chain, you have to monitor the environmental impact. So if you see the sustainable practice, green procurement is one sustainable practice, that is sourcing the material that are environmental friendly and ethically produced. Then efficient transportation is low emission vehicles and optimizing delivery schedules. Then energy optimization is utilizing renewable energy sources in manufacturing and healthcare facilities. Then waste reduction, recycling medical plastics and using biodegradable materials. Sustainable packaging, that is redesigning the cold chain packaging to incorporate 100% recyclable component. So cold chain packaging also is 100% recyclable. So these are some of the we are going to see other sustainable practices and related to healthcare environment. First of all, you have to see what are the source of waste in healthcare organizations. So the source of waste are going to be from raw materials to manufacturers, medical supplies, to the disposal of the items. Factors that fuel the healthcare supply chain carbon footprint and environment impact include single-use supplies and excess supply packaging, waste and supplies that expire and must be discarded. Fossil fuels, including natural gas, used in transportation of supplies. Then capital equipment energy use, including power used by medical imaging equipment and heat and ventilation and AC, air cooling. Then sterile medical devices and unused instruments prepared for procedures that must be reprocessed and discarded. Then anesthetic gases are greenhouse gases which contribute to the climate warming and ozone depletion. So these are all different wastes that you can identify. So many wastes, but these are mainly contributing to the sustainability of the impact the sustainability of healthcare supply chains. So what is the role of healthcare supply chains? Global emissions. If you see here, entire healthcare industry and climate change are very interlinked. Healthcare sector is responsible for 8.5% of greenhouse gas emissions in US, largely from hospital care, from physician and clinical services. So in India also, of course, it is significant. So these emissions are classified into three groups. These are called GRI report. So the GRI report, when you are trying to report in a standard format, global standard format, that GRI report, ESG reports, these reports are going to measure the sustainable practices depending on how directly or indirectly they are influencing the industry actions. Scope 1 emissions are going to be direct emissions controlled by the organization, including emissions from facilities and vehicles. Scope 2 is indirect emissions, generation of purchased energy such as electricity, steam, heating and cooling. Scope 3 is all indirect emissions, including those within the supply chain, covering the production, transportation of goods and services. So mostly Scope 3 is going to be contributing more emissions in the healthcare sector. Scope 3 emissions includes emissions related to supply chain, such as generated by production and transportation, and of course of medical supplies, waste management. So they constitute most of the emissions, 80% Scope 3. So when you are going for accreditation or sustainable measurement, sustainable reporting, then you have to see the Scope 3 emissions should be focused. So in the sustainable healthcare supply chain practices, sustainable sourcing and procurement practices are very important. You have to look for the suppliers who have given more priority for waste reduction, including non-hazardous and hazardous waste, energy efficiency, limited use of fossil fuels, and lower carbon emissions. So your suppliers should also be aligned with your sustainable practices. For healthcare providers, supply chain leaders looking to reduce their environmental adjusting procurement policies to prioritize suppliers-based verified environmental disclosures is a good practice. So suppliers, they have to disclose the environmental concern, environmental impact. To start with, based on that report, you are going to select the suppliers. Then many well-known suppliers are invested in sustainability and waste reduction initiatives to reduce their environmental impact. Otherwise, suppliers are going to be registered and you cannot supply. Another strategy is to purchase from the smaller and local suppliers to local healthcare settings, so that you can reduce the distance. Then, waste management and recycling initiatives. In healthcare organizations, large quantities of plastics are used throughout all floors, care pathways in the patient delivery. While the research has shown 85% of plastics could be recycled, but 91% of the plastics still end up with the landfills or in natural environments. That is creating environmental pollution. So medical supply manufacturer, distributor, and strategic partner Medline offers these tips to waste reduction and recycling plastics used in the healthcare facilities. One is sustainable packaging, we already discussed. Replace traditional plastic package with sustainable packaging materials such as bio-based. Then optimize the packing. So optimize the packing to use only what is necessary, don't overpacking, so that it leads to waste. Then reusability, reusable containers to ship products instead of cardboard containers. Then closed loop recycling, that is recycling the material, the products to back to the system, ensure that materials are recycled and repurposed within the industry itself, not to the other industries. Sometimes your byproducts are going to be sold by other suppliers for different purpose. But here the closed loop recycling is only the same manufacturing process it has to go through. And effective and efficient sorting separation is also very important. Deploy advanced sorting and separation technologies that can improve. Of course, nowadays you are using AI and machine learning. So how you are going to resort to sorting and separation. So energy efficient supply chain operations, if you see here, use of disposable goods and products represent a large part of industry energy footprint. But if you see in the survey of global healthcare executives, energy consumption was voted as a number one feasible level to improve hospital environment footprint. In addition to sourcing for energy, you have to take all the steps to see that energy independent, such as leveraging solar energy. Healthcare provider organizations can address energy usage related to the equipment they purchase. When they purchase the equipment also, the energy efficient equipment you have to purchase. And procurement professionals also should target on capital equipments where high energy consumption, such as imaging, push for equipment that consume less energy. So CT scan, imaging, all these things you have to see that how the energy consumption that is there. So imaging equipment with the power down capability can save significant energy and reduce the energy costs for healthcare facilities. So hospitals leading to sustainability. So there are some hospitals cases if you see here. Cleveland Clinic, they have saved the system more than $100 million since 2010. So through converging through a containment. So they have seen the standardized instrument sets reusable rigid sterilization containers to reduce the need for the blue propylene plastic sterilization wrap. And opting for greener anesthetic agent. That is also one aspect. Then reducing the waste through pre-process. These three important measures they have taken. This is one case study that you can go to. These are the important things they have created a sustainable environment. Another one is Providence Health Services. They have taken up a two-step approach that is addressing the impact of anesthetic gases. When you are giving a anesthetic gases in the environment, so desflurane avoidance, that is reduced inhaled electric emissions by 4,550 tons CO2 equivalent per year. Then resource conservation. So this is Providence St. Vincent Medical Center. They decommissioned leaky central nitrous oxide piping, reducing losses of the gas by 958 tons. These are sustainable measures they have taken. And Gunson Health System also, they've gone for energy conservation project in that they're able to see that 54% improvement and financial savings are there. Then recycling they have done 45% recycling and reuse rate of solid waste system. Then consolidated services center, they have that particular department. They have focus on solar and geothermal and battery storage to make facility more energy. So these are the different cases. Coming to the key aspects of sustainable healthcare supply chains. Sustainable procurement we have already seen. Local sourcing we have seen. Green packaging we have seen. Waste reduction we have seen. Renewable energy and water conservation. Water usage should be minimized. And ethical sourcing. These are the most important sustainable practices in healthcare supply chains. Apart from that, collaboration with suppliers also, because it is win-win situation to work together to implement improvements across the supply chain. Even supplier also can give you some kind of how he is going to contribute to your manufacturing process, design of materials. Data tracking and reporting, again, data collection and transparent reporting to stakeholders, then reduce environmental impact, then cost savings, improve brand reputation, then positive social impact. So there is one small case study that you can easily understand further. That is a pharmaceutical company, mid-sized pharmaceutical company, is trying to transform its supply chain towards sustainability. How it happened? The company sources raw materials from multiple global suppliers and distributes finished goods to hospitals and pharmacies across various. This is the situation. This is the system. Traditionally, the focus was minimizing the cost and maximizing the delivery speed. But however, the organization faces increasing pressure from the stakeholders to adopt green practices and ensure ethical sourcing. This is the pressure, market pressure. If you're not maintaining a sustainable practices, you are not adopting sustainable practices, so it is very difficult to survive in the competitive environment. And suppliers, they won't supply, and also customers won't buy it. So you have to see this every stage of the supply chain. You have to take care of this sustainable practices. So they have taken up supplier assessment and collaboration. That's the challenge. Suppliers vary in their environmental standards and social practices. So different suppliers will have different social backgrounds and different financial backgrounds. And how are you going to see this? This is a big challenge to enable sustainability. So implement a supplier evaluation system that accounts for carbon footprint, labor standards, ethical sourcing. So these are the things when you are trying to validate your supplier, a new supplier. So you have to see that this carbon footprint, what is the generation of carbon footprint, and labor standards, what are the labor standards, what are the pays they are giving, and ethical sourcing. All this in collaborate suppliers to improve the sustainability by sharing best practices to provide incentives for meeting green criteria. This is what supplier assessment collaboration is one of the aspects they implemented. And packaging and waste reduction also. Pharmaceutical products often require multiple layers of packaging for safety and compliance, leading to excess waste. So now you have to redesign packaging to be more biodegradable and recyclable. Work with partners to adopt reusable crates. So this reduces landfills waste and cut packaging cost in long run. Then transportation optimization, global distribution involves extensive air, sea, and land transportation contributing to high carbon emissions. Now, how do you optimize use optimization software and consolidate shipments, and then explore eco-friendly transportation models, hybrid models, or electric vehicles, and investigate carbon offset program to neutralize the emissions. Then cold chain management. Then temperature sensitive. During COVID environment, we have supplied the vaccines using cold chain management. So demand continuous refrigeration to maintain the temperature. So traditional refrigeration systems are energy intensive. So we have to adopt a strategy that energy efficient refrigeration technologies advance the monitoring system that reduce the energy consumption while maintaining the product quality. Then applications exclusively for hospital supply chains, green procurement, waste management, energy efficiency, and community engagement. These things we have seen. So another way of looking is when you have a sustainable practice, and also how do we look at the sustainable practices are maintained? So there should be a measurement. That's a measure sustainability in healthcare industry. So what are the factors influencing is the lean management, patient satisfaction, employee satisfaction, continuous improvement, and corporate social responsibility, brand accreditation. All these things are part of measuring sustainability in healthcare supply chain. If you see in the lean management, again, transportation, then inventory, motion study, movement of material, goods, waiting time, the overproduction, over processing, and defects. Coming to patient satisfaction factor, appointment availability, efficiency, professionalism, and facility quality and core services. Then employee satisfaction, reward, career development, salary package, and these things. Continuous improvement again, new technology, innovation, workflow, and corporate social responsibility, that is social, environment, economic. Then brand is building friendly, then transparency, reputation, communication. Then accreditation is ISO, JCA, and now you have a ESG disclosures and other standard formats of reporting your sustainability measurement. So sustainability measurement is just I'm going to give you some few more minutes on sustainable management, which is very important. So environmental sustainability, what are the metrics that you are going to have? So metrics, carbon footprint, waste management, energy consumption, water, that you know it. So in the carbon footprint, you will be having a GSG, greenhouse gas emissions, and from procurement production. Waste management, percentage of medical and non-medical waste that is recycled, incinerated, or landfill. Energy consumption, usage of renewables versus non-renewable across supply chain. Then water usage, amount of water consumed per bed, per patient, per day. So other resources, all these things you have to have a accounting or assessment or consumption levels. Then you have a tools called life cycle, standard tools called life cycle assessment, which is going to evaluate the environmental impact across the product life cycle. Then green supplier assessment that we have seen earlier, measure suppliers adherence to eco-friendly. This is what economic sustainability. Coming to economic cost efficiency, reduction in operational cost, and then value creation, long-term savings from energy efficient technologies, then supplier sustainability performance, use of certified suppliers, all these things. The tools are total cost of ownership tool is available, which evaluate the cost across the life cycle of products, and also sustainable procurement metrics focus on sourcing sustainable sourcing metrics. Then social sustainability is looking at the workplace safety, ensuring safety conditions, safety of the workers, community engagement. Then ethical labor practice, avoidance of child labor, fair wage, and other things. Your social life cycle assessment is there tool, and CSR is also one of the important tool to measure this social sustainability. So there are some examples, sustainability initiatives. If you circular economy practice recycling unused pharmaceuticals and medical device to reduce waste and manufacturing demand, green logistics, hospital waste management, and energy efficient facilities. Then one more thing that I would like to mention is carbon trading. So now when you are having a sustainable practices, then carbon trading is one important aspect, that is a market-based mechanism to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So it is going to set a limit on the amount of carbon dioxide and other gases that companies can emit, and then allowing them to trade carbon credits and allowances. So companies are now, this is a global practice, companies are now going for emitting less than their allocated limit, can sell their excess allowances to their. So when you have a carbon credit, so you have a allowance, so you can sell it, your carbon credits, to the other companies and get the money. So that means you are maintaining the low levels of the carbon emissions, you will get some credits. Those credits can be encashed. This is what carbon trading. Carbon emission, I think you know that greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and these emissions are major contributor in the entire climate change and how we are going to. So these are the greenhouse gas emission composition is carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbons is the highest pollutant, and perfluorocarbons, and sulfur hexafluoride, nitrogen trifluoride. All these things are important constituents of greenhouse gas emissions. Sustainable report, as I discussed, it is a document outlines organizational, economic, and environmental and social performance through metrics that are given. This report includes information on organizational sustainable strategy, targets, and initiatives, as well as its impact on the environment, society, and economy. So, this is also one important aspect I would like to tell, the role of individual and society, not only from the organization point of view, in implementing sustainable development goals. Save LCT by using energy efficient products. An individual, you have to see this for best sustainable practices. Recycling of plastic and glass and paper. Don't waste paper when it is not needed. Don't donate things you don't use to people. Use to people who need them. Support local farmers. Do not waste food. Educate children in community. Don't waste paper, water, and use bicycle. Of course, how many of the people are liking to use bicycle and transport that will help environment? Try not use public plastic, which is providing a very harmful environment. Plant more and more trees around you, which will help. So more trees if you plant, definitely that is going to create a better environment. support the marginalized and underprivileged societies, and promote equality and empower women and girls. These are individual social responsibility. Then carbon trading, as I told you, carbon trading, I already discussed about this carbon trading. So this carbon trading is measured in terms of greenhouse gases, that is 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalent per allowance. This is how the metric. So company is going to receive the emission allowances, credit balances for the carbon trading, and they are going to see that how best they can reduce the carbon below the given standards. So carbon, how it is relevant, carbon trading healthcare, this is also very important. So when your hospital energy efficient products are there, suppose the hospital install energy efficient heating and ventilation and AC systems, so reducing its emission by 1,000 metric tons of CO2 annually. This is a trend. And if hospital operates in a cap and trade system, it can sell these saved allowances to another organization generating revenue. So the carbon credits will be there. Renewable energy in healthcare facilities, their solar energy and all this thing reduce depends on fossil fuels. So again, you will get, if you measure it, then you will get carbon credits if it is below the level. Medical waste management, again, emissions reductions can qualify carbon credits. And green pharmaceutical manufacturing, again, that you can reduce the emissions and see that how cleaner production technologies can be used. So it is a revenue generation and cost efficiency and environmental leadership, and also compliance with the regulations. So you are able to participate in the carbon trading. And carbon accounting, there is one more thing, is carbon process of measuring and tracking, reporting greenhouse gas emissions for an organized product and activity. Just it's only you are giving a report. It helps to quantify emissions in carbon dioxide equivalent and is a critical step toward achieving sustainability goals. So measure emissions. So scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions are there as defined by GHG protocol. So product carbon accounting, throughout the life cycle, you have to identify. This is one diagram that is hospital supply chain. This is a simple supply chain of a hospital with all the things we have discussed so far, and different flows and different services, clinical and support services, medical services, and other supporting activities, purchasing, warehousing, and other things. So output is health status and clinical. This is going to now, these are the current hospital supply chains to be transformed into sustainable supply chain management supply chains. So that is environmentally conscious, economic oriented, and socially responsible. So this is how sustainable, responsible supply chain transformation. So green procurement, I told you, as already we have discussed, footprint. How do you minimize the ecological footprint of the supply chain in the purchasing process towards suppliers? Energy efficiency also, you have to see that how you can LED lighting. Energy efficiency, any kind of initiative that can be possible, so that you can optimize the consumption of energy. And suppose if it's lighting, LED lighting is going to minimize the consumption of the units and reduce the environmental impact. And waste reduction also we have seen. And so supplying the suppliers, the packaging and disposable equipment, they should be very careful. And also they have to have a partnership with the suppliers to manage the companies, to see that how they are both are responsible to see that medical waste and promote the recycling of material. Collaborations of sustainable suppliers, of course. Then ethical labor practices, continuous monitoring, this is also repeated again. Then coming to the last one, that is very important thing, that is single use and multi-use items in sustainable healthcare. So sometimes you have a single use, sometimes single use is use and throw, and multi-use systems. But multi-use systems are going to play a very important role in achieving sustainability goals. But both categories have challenges in terms of patient safety and operational efficiency and environmental impact. Now you see here, single-use items are designed for one time use only. So ensures sterility and minimize the infection risks. Convenient for high volume and emergency scenarios. High volume and emergency scenarios requires no cleaning or sterilization. infrastructure. So you can throw it. Sterilization, where you have a high sterilization requires, want to minimize the infections, then this is okay. So generate significant medical waste. Single use is going to create medical waste often made from non-degradable materials like plastics, high recurring procurement cost. So sustainable solutions is transition to biodegradable and compostable materials so that you can reduce this waste. So syringes and needles, surgical masks, IV bags, test kits, and disposable things. Then multi-use is reusable and proper sterilization between uses and require proper sterilization. They are cost effective and reduce material waste over time. So advanced reuse waste and procurement costs, reduce waste and procurement cost, minimize environmental impact when properly managed, long-term economic benefits. Challenges are require sterilization every time when you are using the material. High initial instrument, potential cross-contamination will be there. So here the surgical instruments, reusable gowns and drapes. Now the gowns are coming. So during the COVID PPE kit that you have to use it and throw to the environment. So here reusable gowns, it can be used to different iterations. Made from durable, washable practices and sustainable washing facilities, water recycling systems. And glass syringes also sterilized with energy efficient systems. Reusable shops and containers also made from durable and recycled materials. Then sterilization trays and containers, stainless steel and long-lasting polymers. So this is a comparison between the reuse, single-use and multi-use, one of the important aspects of sustainable supply chain that we discussed so far. So now the thing is single-use you can use in high-risk settings like ICUs. Adopt compostable single-use items. And routine use is items of surgical and diagnostic settings where sterilization infrastructure is readily available. So this is single use is based on safety, cost, and environment considerations you have to use. So that you have to create a balance between these two. So these things we have seen, sustainable potential indicators we have already seen. Then metrics, environmental metrics, also we have seen earlier. Greenhouse gas emissions, water consumption, waste generation, and resource consumption and pollution prevention. These are the social metrics, labor practice, diversity and inclusion, and community engagement, product safety and ethical sourcing. And economic metrics, cost savings, supply chain efficiency, product life cycle cost, brand reputation, and investor relations. And additional metrics, again, we have already seen the circular economy metrics, track percentage of material recycled, reused, and repurposed within the supply chain, renewable energy usage, sustainable procurement, product design and sustainability, and innovation and sustainability. So now, some of the examples, if you just see finally, so there is a Indian example that is National Health Service Sustainable Procurement Strategy. UK ensure the supplies follow strict environmental guidelines reducing carbon emissions. And Kaiser Permanente, the USA, they have prioritized purchasing reusable medical equipment and eco-friendly pharmaceuticals. And waste reduction circular economy, if you see Apollo Hospital, they have a waste segregation system to recycle plastic waste from IV tubes and syringes. And then energy efficient logistics systems, if you see AIMS, they collaborate with suppliers to consolidate deliveries and reducing unnecessary transportation and emissions. Then sustainable packaging, if you see Johnson & Johnson reduced PVC packaging for medical devices and switch to biodegradable materials. And then sustainable cold chain management, there is a Pfizer and Moderna, they optimize vaccine and cold chain life by using energy efficient cooling units. And there is NGO that is PATH has developed solar powered refrigerators. Then digitalization to reduce paper waste. Apollo Hospital, they are implementing, and the Fortis also electronic health records, eliminating the filmless, even imaging also. Radiology department is filmless, paperless records and filmless records through electronic health records. And then water conservation is John Hopkins and other Tata Memorial Hospital. They are using a recycling system where the water can be used for drinking and other purposes. Implementing low flow plumbing fixtures also, rainwater harvesting to reduce water consumption. Then green hospitals, carbon neutrality. If you see, Narayana Health is implementing solar-powered health facilities in rural areas, reducing dependence on the fossil fuels. And also the important thing, that is Public Health Foundation of India is collaboration with the Healthcare Without Harm. They initiated the Healthcare Environment Leadership Help. This platform is going to encourage hospitals to integrate sustainability into the procurement process by selecting eco-friendly and ethically sourced material supplies. So like that, waste reduction you can see. Now finally, I conclude that healthcare industry is evolving and also one of the complex, multifaceted, team-oriented industry. It requires definitely sustainable practice that promote environmental and social responsibility. And embracing the sustainable supply chain practice is not only moral imperative but also strategic decision that enhance the top leadership also should also provide guidance, and also direction to the entire people in the organization to see that how resilient and efficiency of the supply chain organizations will be ensured. As healthcare organizations continue to embrace sustainability, they will not only be their own operations, but also they have to contribute to the healthier planet for future generations. Thank you very much. Any questions, please? Mr. I think it will be a little.
Thank you, sir.
time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for exhaustive and enlightening session on the healthcare sustainable healthcare supply chain. I think those who are in the sustainable supply chain in healthcare, their 1/3 of the literature review is over with your presentation. Nice presentation, sir. Sir, actually, there are a few questions. I think some of the questions have already answered in your presentation, but I still request you to revisit. Starting with Mr. Somen. Hopefully, you are able to see the question, sir, in the comments.
Yeah.
Starting with Mr. Somen at 8:18 p.m. Are you able to see, sir? Please elaborate the role of patient in healthcare supply chain. Starting from there, sir. Able to see, sir, the question?
Just read out the question.
You can stop sharing your screen, sir. It will be better. You also can directly see it. Because sometimes the question is a little lengthy. Now you are able to see, sir, the comments.
Yeah.
So starting with Mr. Somen, please elaborate the role of a patient in healthcare supply chain. You have seen, sir? 8:18. Time is 8:18.
8:18 on it. I'm
Yeah.
just looking at 8:18.
Yes, sir. Little, you have to scroll back.
8:10, 8:12. 8:18. Please elaborate the role of patient in healthcare supply chain management. So it is the role of patient is see that how the healthcare system is going to deliver care to the patient. So you should be aware of all this. That nowadays the patients are highly informed and also see that well aware of the systems and the practices in the hospital. So the role of patient is see that he has to ensure that whether the sustainable practices are maintained or not. Suppose a patient is stepping into a hospital, whether the hospital is really safe or secure. And also the systems are eco-friendly. And what kind of water facility they have, clean water and infection-free zone environment. So these things, certain knowledge you should have from the sustainable point of view. Otherwise, blindly, if he goes, suppose suddenly if the hospital, there is some accident happens, so definitely he should be able to foresee all these situations, how to escape, what kind of disaster management plan they have to follow. That's very important. And he has to see it, how secure it is before entering in. It's not that only surgeon, it's not only the facility that is going to have the specialty is going to have. You have to see the environment and also internal process and also safety. and social responsiveness of the employees also you have to take care. These are the some of the things patient has to take care. Yeah.
So the second question, Mr. Purushot, are you able to see, sir?
Yeah, how far circular economy can apply in the healthcare supply chain? Yes, healthcare supply chain you can apply. So circular economy is going to be applied most of the hospitals in coming years, because the used material at different stages of the supply chain, healthcare supply chain, even patient, some of the bedside wastages. So these can be recirculated and recycled to see that how do we recover the valuable chemicals from the recycling. So the circular economy in the hospital, suppose suppliers are going to take. It's not that only hospitals are linked to suppliers. So suppliers are going, suppose if you say one particular MRI equipment. So MRI equipment is not functional. So you cannot dispose, it is waste only. So in that case, some of the components, some of the spare parts, useful parts can be recycled to the manufacturer who is supplying that material, so that you can refurbish it. Fine. Next.
So next is Mr. Indranil. He is asking how popular and feasible is the sustainable supply chain in healthcare sector in Indian context.
Yeah. So this is very important because the patient safety, patient security is very important, and facility design also very important. Green building, all these things, concepts are coming up. So that's why the sustainability, how a hospitals, as I told you in the beginning, hospitals are going to not only curing the illness, but also they are contributing a lot of carbon emissions to the environment. 85% in US, 85%. India also, it is most of the hospitals are generating at the same time the emissions, carbon emissions. So that we have to minimize it in terms of energy conservation, water minimization, waste minimization at different places. And you can also use the technologies and eco-friendly equipment, eco-friendly material, all these things. Yes. Next.
Next is Mr. Rahman. What he's saying is this is a bit interesting. How can successful small-scale sustainability initiatives be scaled across larger multi-site healthcare organization without losing effectiveness? I think a bit.
Yeah, these are see when they are going for reverse logistics and closed loop supply chain, or you can say that the recycling and reusing. So there are some biomedical what do you call that, waste management companies are coming up. So it is, so you are outsource the recycling to some other small scale industries. So there are so many packaging, sorting agents, sorting and then separation, and then transporting this to other facilities. All these things these are all, many players are going to evolve. It's not that hospital is going to take care of all the recycling and reusing. So individual players are going to be part of it as a SMEs, small scale sustainability. So small scale organizations are going to be stakeholders in maintaining the sustainability of the operations or healthcare operations. Yes.
Sir, Mr. Soma Sundaram, he is asking what additional efforts are to be taken by super specialty hospitals that promote medical tourism for improvement in the sustainability in the supply chain, related to little bit of medical.
Yeah. So they have medical tourism. They have it's efforts to be taken. Super specialty hospital, they are already taking care of this accreditations, quality accreditation, JCA accreditation, NABH accreditation, so many accreditations to attract medical tourists. But from the sustainability point of view, so they have to disclose their carbon emissions. They have to disclose. So you have a ESG, environmental, social, and governance reports in the disclosures. How the hospital is, what kind of emissions, amount of emissions are releasing to atmosphere for that particular hospital. That is environment disclosure through transportation, through production, through energy utilization. All these things is a comprehensive report that ESG is going to be having, and other reports also available. So other than DCA accreditation, other than NABH, other than other ISO 14001, So this sustainable reports also one of the important key measures to attract medical tourists, because their safe journey, their safety, and their care. Of course, caring and curing is there, but at the same time, so they should not create environmental degradation. That's very important. So they have to disclose it. They have to disclose their environmental practices, so that the international patients are going to see that. So it is highly safe and eco-friendly and healthy system. Fine.
Sir, one
Next.
more from one of the participants. Implementing these things in the government sector, government healthcare sector is a challenge. So, what is your say on that, sir?
So in the government sector is a challenge because of funds problem. So they should invest in these sustainability practices in terms of adopting a technology and other things. So the government sector, they have to have some partnership with the private players, like public-private partnership. They can develop these things, and also they can see that particularly in government sector is really challenging, but even government sector also, they are trying to follow some minimum standards, but not fully extent, but minimum standard. But they should have a partnerships, they should have public-private partnerships, and also government also should support creating some kind of additional funds, incentives, those who are maintaining the sustainable practices.
So, Dr. Kanan is asking, what about other countries other than USA on sustainability strategies? Other than
What
USA,
are the measures? What,
apart from the USA, what about other countries'
other
strategies?
countries also, other countries are they're slowly coming forward to follow the sustainable practices. It's a compulsory. Everybody has to, if you want to survive on the planet, you have to contribute to sustainability practices. Otherwise, it's very difficult. Next, for how India is going to become by 2047 Viksit Bharat, 5 trillion economy. So all these things are to be very important. So developed countries also should contribute and see that they should reduce the carbon emissions.
So, Mr. Rahman sir has already responded to your queries. So that's all, sir. With this, thank you very much, sir. No more questions.
Okay,
And
right. Thank you, one and
thank
all.
you very much
One
for
and all.
your exhaustive presentation and enlightening theoretical, suggestions, then literature review. So one third of the sustainable literature in healthcare sector is over if they have listened to your presentations very carefully. So thank you very much, sir. And so we have come to the end part of the today's session. So thank you very much, sir. We'll stop here now.
Thank you. And thank you, one and all.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
very
one and
much,
all.
sir.
Any,
Thank you
any
all the
kind of
participants.
queries, you can contact Pramod Kumar Mishra. We
Yes,
will
sir.
work together and see that how do we contribute to the society and economically, socially, and environmentally.
So just a small piece of information. Tomorrow, Vice
Yeah.
Chancellor sir will be joining.
Yeah.
The time is not very clear. So as and when he joins, we'll have the valedictory for a while, and
Yeah.
then we'll proceed with the presentations. Right, sir?
At
So
what
please
time?
be,
At what times?
that's not very clear, sir. I'll just find it out. So you also can be little flexible, sir, tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah. So thank
Okay.
you very much, sir.
I may join in mobile phone.
It's okay, sir. No issues. It's okay, sir.
Okay.
So thank you very much, everyone. So stay tuned to two more presentations. So before we leave, one question Mr. Raymond is further asking: how excessive use of antibiotics affecting the sustainability of healthcare ecosystem? So I think
Yeah, that is actually, there are
partly
multi-drug
you
resistant
covered.
MDRs are coming up. So antimicrobial infections. So effective use of resistance for will come down. Effective use of antibiotics should be harmful. So that is against sustainability. So because it is creating bad health, and also your body resistance will be coming down, and it is not contributing the healthy system. So it is a patient that is actually contributing the patient health. So that's why excessive use of antibiotics should be minimized. That also one of the aspects of the sustainability practices. So if you look at in deeper and deeper, you see that in the sustainability reporting, what kind of antibiotics you are using, how many days patient is staying, length of stay, and what extent why the patient has consumed excessive antibiotics than normal. Any temperature is continuously there. All the monitoring will be there. So everything is monitored, transparent.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. We'll stop the stream now. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All the best.